Hi Larry, it's Sue Dickman. I'm on my way over to the 2nd Avenue Deli to meet you. I'm really so happy that you and Naomi Levine agreed to do the interview for our new web series, Donors and Delis. I'll see you soon.
Are you done yet? I need the table. I'm busy, busy.
Actually, we'd like to finish our conversation. If you could see your way clear to use a different table, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, this is a very tough room here. Really.
When Sue Dickman asked me to do this interview with Larry Zicklin, I was at first flattered, but then got very worried because Larry is a extraordinary man in the world of finance. And if Neuberger and Berman are what they are, it's due largely to him. And to tell you the truth, I don't know much about finance. I know how to balance my checkbook, but I'm never sure what goes on in those companies. But the more I read about his background, I discovered we had a lot in common. He's a great philanthropist, really one of the great philanthropists of the city. I teach philanthropy and fundraising, and I've done that for the last 30 years of my life. Then I read more and found that he's a teacher, and he teaches the course that's closest to my heart, and that's ethics. He teaches about ethics in government, and I teach about ethics in the nonprofit world. So the truth is, we have an enormous amount in common, and I think we'll have a lot to talk about. But before we continue, I thought it was important for Larry to tell you about himself, how he got involved in finance, the role of the college he went to, and how he decided that that would be the world he would spend his life to. So if you don't mind, Larry, would you tell them about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in Brooklyn. My father was a Polish immigrant. My mother was born just after my grandmother arrived on these shores. Went to the local schools, local high school, and wound up at what was then City College and what is now Baruch College because it was free. And I was going up to a place where it was free. And it was a meritocracy. You either qualified or you didn't. If you did, you were in. If you didn't, you were out. Fortunately, I was in. Spent 4 years at, as I say, City, now Baruch. Went on to Wharton. Got a master's degree at Wharton, then went into the Air Force for a while. Came back, didn't know what I was going to do. I went to see my father, who owned a candy store. And I said to him, I'm not sure what I want to do. And my father had a great piece of advice for me. I'll never forget it. He said to me, why don't you go and try and work somewhere where a lot of money changes hands? And who knows, a little might drip off for you. And so I found my way to Wall Street, spent the first 10 years of my career at Merrill Lynch, then spent the next 30 years at Neuberger Berman, retired in 1969, had begun teaching in 1989 at NYU, and simply continued teaching when I retired, just became a half-time professor at NYU, wound up at Wharton and at Baruch, and I've been kind of balancing those two balls in the air ever since.
You know, Larry is very modest. He didn't tell you about his philanthropy. And while I hate to read anything, I'm going to read this paper because even I couldn't remember all the places that he has made contributions. So forgive me if I read it. He has, let me see, for millions of dollars, I won't give you the amount, he created the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College. Without that, you take my word, Baruch probably couldn't exist and have that program in view of the problems that the city universities have. The Baruch Center for Financial Integrity, the Robert Zicklin Center for Corporate Integrity, and he endowed Wharton's Carol and Lawrence Zicklin Center for Business Ethics Research. He is a teacher, an author, and believe me, he's an author. I spent the last week reading all the stuff he wrote, and it's extraordinary. I'm a little bit of a writer, and I know what good writing is. He not only is a thoughtful writer, he's an imaginative writer, and his writing I found extraordinarily interesting. And he wrote, I don't know how many articles on business ethics. The one thing I don't have is the many contributions that he made to the Jewish community. I know as chairman of UJA Federation, he made many. And in that world too, he has been one of their great philanthropists. So he has not only done terrific things in the world of business, but in the world of philanthropy, he has really used his money in the most effective way. And forgive me, because I've done this with some other philanthropists. What made you choose the areas of philanthropy? There are millions of things. There are 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States. You could have given to prostate research, to the Museum of Natural History. How come you chose what you did? What motivated that?
Well, when it comes to the City University, I went to school for 4 years free of charge. 4 years free of charge. Just think of what tuition is today at a 4-year university. How many people graduate with these debts that they can never pay back? 4 years after I started, I graduated with no debt and a college education. I never forgot that. And I figured I owed it to somebody. I also owed it to other people because I know what the city of New York is built on. It's built on the City University. It's built on 275,000 students now, degree seeking students at the City University, plus another 250,000 involved in certificate programs and other programs. So I know the backbone of the city is the City University. So I was active there. My father was an immigrant. My mother was almost an immigrant. She got born very quickly after my grandmother arrived. So I know the history of the Jewish people, and I know what happened, obviously, in World War II. I lived through part of it. And I had resolved I would try and make a difference there, hence UJA. But you mentioned prostate research. I happen to be deeply involved in prostate research.
And I just made that up.
I know, but it happens that I'm deeply involved. I've been funding a scientist for many years.
That's
we're
wonderful.
in trials on some new drugs, so we're involved. I try to concentrate my charities, and I'm involved in 3 or 4 deeply. I'm also involved in some political reform, having to do with political contributions, which I think are a great evil in this society, so I'm working on that. Look, I'm not so sure I can set the rules for anybody other than myself. My experience has been that you want to be passionate for whatever contributions you make. So the 3 or 4 charities that I'm deeply involved in, I'm definitely passionate about. I'm passionate about the City University and what it does for the city of New York. I'm passionate about prostate cancer research. I'm passionate about business ethics. I'm passionate about corporations making hidden contributions to political figures and the effect on society. So I only get deeply involved in what I'm passionate about. I sit on boards. I try to be critical and engage in oversight of those boards because I want it to be done efficiently and properly, and that's where I give my money.
Oh, that's marvelous. Tell me, has the tax deduction, the charitable deduction, been an influence in your fundraising?
Absolutely. It makes life much easier. After all, if you have an appreciated security you can give away, it makes giving to charity so much more efficient, both tax-wise and P&L-wise.
You
It's
see,
just easier.
I don't agree with him on that. I never knew a donor who got up one morning and said, I'm going to give to prostate cancer because I get a tax deduction. I never knew that Mrs. Kimmel got up in the morning and said, I'm going to make a big donation to the Tisch Hospital because I get a tax deduction. I have found in my fundraising that people will decide to give because they want to give back, because they're altruistic, for religious reasons, for all kinds of reasons. And after they make that decision, then they'll call their accountant and then they'll go and decide, should I do it to a donor advised fund? Should I do it for the In other words, I believe that the tax deduction is secondary to the motivation.
I'm not so sure we disagree. I would just simply say, given the tax deduction, you can afford to make a greater contribution than you ordinarily would.
Yeah, I don't argue on that. I agree. My colleague who teaches with me on the ethics course is Bill Josephson, the former Assistant Attorney General, and we both have testified before the Senate Finance Committee on the charitable deduction, so that's why I raised it. But I think that you're correct. Now I'm going to move, if you don't mind, into the subject that we have so much in common, ethics. And I must tell you, it has always troubled me to try to define what ethics is really about. And before I try to tell you what I think it's about, I thought you might tell me, how do you define it? How do you, in your own mind, define ethics?
I define it in terms of business. Remember, I'm teaching business ethics. People in the corporate world these days have more power than government. And in my judgment, when you have more power than government, you have certain responsibilities. And your responsibilities are more than the bottom line. While you have responsibilities to shareholders or owners, you have responsibilities to society. And I think you've got to weigh those two when you make your decisions. And I find that many business people are not making the proper decisions when it comes to business ethics. And they're weighting their responsibilities to the owners to too great a degree. And I point that out in my classroom.
So that the question of ethics is something that disturbs me very much.
You might be interested to know that this past semester, the dean at Baruch gave me permission to teach a business ethics course out of the newspapers.
Oh, yes.
I said to him, it'll be there. Just give me permission, I'll teach it out of the newspapers.
Every day. Now, coming back to a definition of ethics, Webster's dictionary doesn't help me one goddamn bit. It says, I'll define it and I'll read it again, defines ethics as rules of behavior based on ideas about what is morally good and bad. The question there is, who's going to decide what is good and bad? That's the big issue. So that it's like giving me an answer that doesn't help me in defining what is ethics.
But that may be true on the margin.
All right.
But there are some areas which are obvious. They're just so easy.
Yeah,
lying, bribing, being less than transparent, selling faulty products. When you read about General Motors and the ignition switches or Volkswagen,
the banks.
That's not debatable. That's too easy. At least let's get rid of that. In my class, I truthfully try to stay away from this theoretical stuff, this philosophical stuff. I stay on business. Are drug companies allowed to raise the prices for pharmaceutical products? To what degree are they allowed? How much truth-telling is involved? You have to tell the whole truth, everything. You have to disclose everything.
What about bluffing?
We talk about bluffing. Is bluffing ethical?
I think it's terrible.
Well, it depends on the definition of bluffing, but I have examples of it in my classroom. Look, I try to stay on the edge with my students. What is and what isn't? How far can you go? It's all a matter of degree. Nobody in business or in life, I think, tells the truth all the time. When my wife asks me how this dress looks on her, what do you think I say? It looks wonderful, and the color is perfect. I may not exactly believe it, but I say it anyway because I want to stay married. That's a form of bluffing, I guess. But there are nuances to this. I've learned in my career teaching, and I'm teaching 28 years now, that students are basically ethical, but they fall into a pattern of making compromises, and eventually they make enough compromises, they're on the wrong side of the line. And I try to teach them the judgment to stay on the right side of the line, not the wrong side, and make sure the hair on the back of their neck goes up when they're suddenly trespassing the lines that they should avoid. I've tried to make the point in my class, I hope successfully, that in the long run, businesses survive based on their reputation. And if you have a reputation of catering to the bottom line only, with no regard for anything else, I believe your business will ultimately not succeed or will be impaired. So I try to teach them they have to pay attention to reputation, they have to pay attention to social responsibility, and you're seeing it now. I mean, look what's going on in the world, people with health foods, and better quality food, and disclosure. The world is changing, and you can't fight this change. And business, as I said, which is more powerful than most countries in the world, better realize its responsibilities.
Well, I agree. I take it a little further. I think all of us, whether you're a business or whether you're a nonprofit or whatever, we have a social responsibility to the community in which we live. Otherwise, I think the world will be even worse off than it is today. Well, that's why it's so important to have men like you in the industry. You're an ethical man, you teach it, you're teaching young people that they should make money, but they should do it always thinking of the ethical component. Now, I know I'm told that your children are also involved in the world of philanthropy. Perhaps you would like to talk about that.
The one that's most involved is my daughter. My daughter lives in Israel. She has dual citizenship, and she has a women's empowerment center in Jerusalem. And she's been involved in women's empowerment for the last 20 years. I don't know how many women have been trained in her area. They've been trained, both physically trained to defend themselves and artistically trained to know how to handle themselves and go out and preach women's empowerment. So she's deeply involved. She has an account at JCF, as does my son, which is the nice thing about JCF, by the way. To the extent I die and leave money in JCF, my kids have been named successors, so they will have money to give to charity also, which...
How did you pass that on to your children? How, a lot of rich people aren't able to do that. How did you do it?
I didn't preach it. I think it came through osmosis. But I can tell you this. Both my son and my daughter, at various times in their lives, have told me in one-on-one conversations that of all the things we've accomplished as a family, the thing they're most proud of is not my work at Merrill Lynch or Neuberger Berman. It's what the family has done at Baruch College or at Brooklyn College or at Wharton or at UJA or at Prostate Cancer Research, which they think will be a living memory to this family. So they somehow learned it by example,
by watching,
not by preaching.
Yeah. Well, you have done a marvelous job, and your children are a great tribute to what you have stood for.
And for donors, the Jewish Communal Fund is really the bedrock of the charitable giving that we do. If you think about it, and I'm sure I'm typical of every other person around, life is complicated, and my life is cluttered. But at JCF, it's simple and uncluttered. I do everything online. I haven't any need to save receipts for charitable giving. Everything's handled for me. It's the perfect donor-advised fund, at least for me.
So you're very lucky, and you are a remarkable man, and it has been a great pleasure for me to meet you. And I can't understand how I never met you to get money before. I'm not doing fundraising now, so don't worry. It's a pleasure.
Peace. Take care, Naomi.